Howdoo everyone, I'm Scott from Nightfall Minis, and today we're continuing with our collaboration Naga Minis, and we're going to make ourselves a raccoon on a Clockwork Frog. So following from our last collaboration that we did with Naga Minis with the cat and the mouse knight, they contacted me again and said would I like to look at doing something with the new things this month. And this month is quite a cool little batch that they've got for release. You've got some elephants, but you've also got the raccoon boys, and the raccoon has a Clockwork Frog, and that really drew me towards it. And that's the mini that they offered me to see if I wanted to collab with, so obviously I snapped the hand off. It's a great idea. If you haven't already, you should probably go over and check out Naga Minis over on Patreon. They create content every single month, including bases and minifigures for you to paint for your D&D and fantasy games, or just if you like the look of them. Now these minis come pre-supported, which means it's super easy for printing. Just literally stick the files into, I use Chitubox or whatever slicing software you're using, and get them printed. This is just some Elegoo black resin, and yeah, you're good to go. So the first thing I want to do with these is get them pinned so they're going to be more stable for painting. So for anyone who's never pinned anything before, it's super easy. Just use a bit of cork, or if you've got any wood laying about. For this, I'm just using a bent up paper clip, stick it into the bottom, drill some pilot holes if you need to, super glue it on. It's just going to make it much easier when we're painting, so we're not putting our hands on it and potentially rubbing off some paint. Let's get them primed. And we're going to do two different primes here. So with the raccoon, I've gone for a black prime with a white zenithal highlight. This is going to highlight the details and make it much easier when I'm painting them to make them stand out and find out where the light and the shadows are going to cast. But with the frog, I've gone for a brown highlight. So I use brown because whenever you're painting anything that's going to be copper or gold, brown is a better base coat than black. So in my mind, looking at this frog, it was always going to be a steampunk style. The model warranted it to be steampunk style. So the first thing I thought was all the metal bandings and bindings all over the wood on the frog was going to be copper. Copper to me signifies the steampunk era, and whenever I think about steampunk, it's everything's made out of copper. So I ran some copper just through an airbrush as a first base coat, before then going back and re-paneling all of the wood just with a dark wood, just so I could separate the two different colours and we could get a feel of how this is going to start to look. And with the wood fully base coated and the copper down, it just looked fantastic. The colours were complementing each other lovely, and it was exactly how I wanted the direction of this piece to go. So the next part was to start adding some texture to the wood. So I'm just going for some lighter browns here, and I'm just following the grain of the wood. And I'm doing this gently. I could have easily done this as a dry brush, but I decided to try and put some actual physical detail in this by hand, by brush. So I'm going over all the ridges with a lighter brown, and then finally an even lighter brown before doing a little bit of dry brushing on the very top edges, just to finalize all that wood grain texture and that wood grain effect. The next step was to start blocking out some of the silvers. So all of the stud works, all of the nails or screws or whatever they were that were dotted around the mini, I decided to do in lead belcher just into a normal steel, so I could do a dark steel texture on these for later on. And this included things like the spring and stuff up on the top of it, where the raccoon would be mounted on top of it just a bit later on. After looking at the wood effect and how cool it looked, I decided to start working on some of the copper, and I wanted some distinction between it and to make it look just a little bit nicer. And I noticed there was some banding or some ribbon that was running around the entire edges of the copper panels, so I decided to go in with a bronze just to highlight these a little bit further. With all the copper and bronze paneling done, it was time to give them a bit of shade and a bit more colour, and for this I'm just using Racoon Flesh Shade. It works perfectly with these type of lighter metals. If you want to do a true metallic metal, get some shadow in there, get some wear, and just to give it a bit more colour. The red shade of the Racoon Flesh Shade kind of gives it just a little bit more depth to the bronze and to the copper, and it ties it all in together nicely. And then the final touch to the bronze paneling was just go around and give it a final highlight. So I'm just using pure bronze here, just on top of the eyes, on top of the mouth area and some of the paneling, just to give it that final highlight. all the pieces I'd painted in lead belcher or in a more of a silver paint were then gone over with just pure black Templar contrast. I wanted a dark steel effect, and the black Templar contrast is a bit thicker and a bit darker than your normal null oil wash. Makes it look a bit more grimy, a little bit more worn, and more of a dark steel than just a lighter steel. With the biggest work on the frog now done, the paneling and the wood, it was time for all the little fiddly bits and the bits that would make it look fantastic. So I decided to go with a silver for the eyes. This was going to be later airbrushed with a wash with an intensity ink just to give it a nice glow effect, and then went on to the bags and the straps on the back of it as well. So then this frog was done. Now it's time for the rider. As the rider was already pre-zenithal highlighted, all I need to do was start working on some colour. So onto the face, it was a case of going around the eyes and the nose with a dark black. This was then going to be moved up to a grey and to eventually a white, just mimicking fur, the way that fur would grow around the eyes in a typical Trash Panda style way, and just making it look realistic by tiny little brush strokes and just creating that texture on the model. The eyes and the nose were then painted with a gloss black that I got from Vallejo just to give it more of a wet look and a more live feature, before tanning in some of the leather straps on the back of the head and the goggles, and also putting some silver around the goggles themselves, and then just creating a nice little blue, sort of like you would do a Spirit Stone gem style in blue, and then hitting it with a final coat on top of it of some varnish, some gloss varnish, and this just gave it effect of reflective glass. And I was really pleased with the face, to be fair. It's the first time I painted a raccoon's face, but it looks like a raccoon, so I'm happy with it. It was then time to move on to some of the armour and some of the other stuff that the raccoon was wearing, and it might have been Rocket Raccoon from the Marvel universe, or maybe even Fallout inspired, thinking about the way that steampunk is and end of the world sort of mishmash MacGyvering stuff together, but I decided to go with a blue for all the cloth and then just a dark leather. So layering on a dark blue to start with, highlighting it up and create some texture around the collar and around the arms, and then adding in the dark brown for the leathers. So to create the contrast between the bottom bit, it looks as if on the bottom part of it, it's more like a more sturdy leather than a wearable leather, more like an armor piece rather than just the straps. So the bottom part had a darker leather, whereas the top part had a more highlighted, more movable rustic leather. I wanted to differentiate between the two. I then painted the shoulder pads in steel, ready for a dark steel effect, and also did the straps that was holding up the leather armor parts in copper, just to kind of incorporate and put the two pieces together. I didn't want the raccoon to sit on top of the mount and it just looked odd. I wanted it to try and blend in together, so matching these two colours is kind of going to tie in the colour scheme between the rider and the mount itself. The next step was to look at the gloves, and for this I just used the same leather recipe I've used on the rest of the dark leather armour. So starting with a very dark brown, and then move it up to a medium, and then a final highlight of a much lighter, more orangey brown. And the idea here is to create contrast across the tops of the leather where the light would hit. It helps sell this as a natural leather effect, and it's really effective. Moving down the Mini, it was time to start looking at the gun. So standard brown base coat as always. It just really seems to help the copper and bronze stick to it and show the full potential of the colour, before moving on to the copper and giving it a wash, and then a final highlight of copper on just the top part, just to give the barrel a nice little shine. To finish off the gun, I went round all the latches and catches and bits and pieces that was on the gun with a silver, a gunmetal colour, and also went round all the tools across the belt and across the legs and stuff as well. And this just added a little bit more depth to the Mini, a little bit more detail, and it just broke up all the dark browns and the coppers that were all over the Mini and all over the frog. I forgot to mention it, but the pants were coloured using just black Templar contrast paint straight over the zenithal highlight. The raccoon himself was pretty much done now, and it was time to work on the gears and the knobs and the levers that he was stood on and using to control the frog. So straight on with the silver onto all of the handles and all the gears, and then moving on to brown for the wood effect, and then just continuing with the wood effect that I'd done on the frog itself onto the base of this control panel, doing the same tinting and darkening and washing of the metal that I'd done previously, and then doing the same with the seat as well that he was stood on. The raccoon was then pinned onto the top of the frog just to give it some added stability, and then super glued, and this is going to help it if it gets knocked over. It's not going to break and shatter and fall to pieces. It's going to stay together for a very long time. The last piece I wanted to do on the frog itself was to tackle those eyes. I said before I wanted to put a nice glow effect on it. So just grabbing some intensity ink and running it through an airbrush, running it across the light silver that I painted on the eyes, it gave it a really nice glass sort of glow effect. I'm super happy with how this mini turned out. I love the aesthetic of it. I love the clockwork style of it. I love the colour choices that I made on this. I think it's turned out really, really lovely. I like the transition that we've got between the copper and the bronze and the wood effect that's on the frog itself. I love the glowing eyes that we've managed to get on there, and the raccoon is sick. I've never painted a raccoon's face. It's the first time really painting any sort of furry creatures, this one and the cat that I did previously, but I like it. It's a new technique for me. It's something I've never tried before, painting fur and textures onto a flat surface, and I think I've managed to pull it off. I'm really in love with this model, and if you guys like it too, you should really check out Naga Minis. Link is in the description below for their Patreon. Go and support them. They're fantastic people. They create amazing minis like this for you to paint every single month, and you should really go and support people like this. And you can also support my own Patreon. So the link is in the description below for Nightfall Minis on Patreon. A few dollars a month will keep me in coffees while I'm up till midnight trying to record content before going out and doing my full-time job in between looking after my kids. Feel sorry for me and help me and support me. I love making content, and I hope I can do more of this sort of stuff in the future, and the only way I'm going to be able to do that is with your love and support. So thank you for everybody who does support, who does like, and who does comment on these videos. I really appreciate everything. I'll make sure I respond to every single comment on these videos. Cheers for Naga Minis for being absolutely epic. Now let's finish this mini off, and in order to do that we need to base it. Now, to base this mini, I could have used any one of the 3 amazing bases that comes with this month's Patreon from Naga Minis. So they've got this amazing little control panel with a wooden floor. They've got a nice stone sort of effect with an anvil. Really, really like that one. And also a clockwork one as well, which would be cool for a little centerpiece or a cog-themed army. But me being me, I wanted to make a bit of a diorama with this one. And the video for this diorama will be the next one I upload, so hopefully in a week's time. But I really had fun making this. It's the first active diorama I've ever made to try and link in with the story I'm trying to tell. And the story for this one is a raccoon building his own little clockwork mount inside of his little dungeon workshop type deal. It took me a long time to make this and to make the diorama for it. It's a really cool little centerpiece. It's something I've never made before, never done before. I'm really proud of how it turned out, and I hope you guys like it too. And as always, if you enjoy the content, don't forget to like, comment and subscribe. Cheers for being awesome, and we'll catch you in the next one.